I'm Cheryl Dozier, host of The Game of Politics. No agendas, just an honest political discussion. Welcome to the show. Joining me on the show is Chief Delrish, former Miami police officer, current Florida International University police captain, and former chief of police of Ferguson, Missouri, who is instrumental for bringing calm to a city in turmoil. We're going to discuss, why do good cops just stand there when a bad cop goes rogue? Specific cops standing there while George Floyd met his demise and other situations like it. We're also going to discuss police reform and what it's going to take to affect real change. And Police Chief Moss is an expert in these type of things. We've seen him on CNN. We've seen him in several instances where there's turmoil in other cities and just bringing calm. And so we want to welcome at this time Chief Moss to the show. Hi.
Hi, thank you.
Everybody isn't able, Chief Moss. And everybody, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you. It's my pleasure to be here.
Okay. Chief Moss, let's get into this. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about first what you feel is the reason that cops, the good cops, tend to let the bad cops influence them. And what do you feel needs to happen to affect change in that regard?
Well, for the most part, I think a lot of cops, a lot of police officers stand around and do nothing. One, because there are in a lot of police departments, there are no policies that dictate what they do. But I think more important than that is the leadership and the message that leadership is giving. For instance, when I was in Ferguson, we implemented a duty to intervene policy. And the reason for that policy was because I didn't like the fact that you saw police officers just standing around when people are going rogue. Sometimes, even when they're emotional about a situation, another police officer pulling them back when it's safe to do so can actually avoid an incident like what we saw in Minneapolis. And so we came up with a duty to intervene, making it the police officers on the scene's responsibility to either, one, safely intervene, two, report it, and three, they got fired if they didn't tell the truth. And so we did that in Ferguson, but the other thing that we did was we created an environment where police officers knew it was their responsibility. The ones who did do so safely would have a safe harbor with the chief. And if they didn't do so, they would be found as culpable and as negligent as a police officer who did the bad deed.
Wow. Okay. And can you tell me how those policies that you put in place, how they were received? Because you were new, so tell me how the rank and file, reacted to those new policies.
Well, one of the things that happened in Ferguson when I got there is I set the tone by giving them a message, basically saying, look, if you do the job the way it's supposed to be done, we'll get along just fine. But if you do it in a way that disrespects the badge and dishonors the badge that you hold, then I will either prosecute you or I'll fire you. And we did fire some police officers because some police officers didn't tell the truth. We did fire some police officers. But I think, on police departments, typically you have a lot of cops who are good, hardworking cops who do the job the way it's supposed to be done. Then you have 5% who are super good. And you got that 5% that's bad. And what leadership has to do is make sure that, one, you're working to weed out those who are bad. But secondly, that you're encouraging the types of behavior that are positive and reinforce the message that you're sending so that the police officers in the middle will follow those ones who are really good. Leadership is critical. Leadership is everything.
Do you think that there are, as a result of things in Minneapolis, do you think that there are going to be some policies in place, I'd say even coming from the federal level, that are going to help with those things that you put in place?
So from the federal level, this administration has not embraced consent decrees. It's not embraced police reforms in the manner that allows it to step in. In the previous presidential administration, President Obama actually put in place a number of consent decrees. As a result, Ferguson was one. So it really depends on the administration. But one of the things that happened is everything that's happened since Mr. Floyd's death has been a clarion call to police chiefs to step up and start addressing some of these things from a policy perspective. So I think what's happening there is you have a relatively new chief who, in fact, sued the department himself for discrimination and won, who just kind of got into the seat, who moved very swiftly to terminate those officers, which was the height of what he could actually do before the whole prosecution phase started to take place.
Mm-hmm.
I think he was already working on a lot of these things, but I think this sped up that process. And right now in Minneapolis, they're looking at what they're going to do as a city, what the future of their police department is.
Okay, now you spent a lot of time in Missouri. You made some wonderful inroads. You did a lot of networking with the individuals that I have contact with. And one thing that has happened today is that the Missouri Legislative Black Caucus has asked the governor to enact a special legislative session to put some things in place that would affect the policing standards that they feel need to be addressed. Now, how do you feel about Missouri and the probability that those things might be put in place from a state perspective?
Well, look, in Missouri, and I'm still certified there, so I'm still sort of subject to Missouri Post, police officer standards and training.
Okay.
In Missouri, I think that the legislative body has a great responsibility to make sure that they're making changes. You know, one of the things that happens is they mandate a certain amount of training. Well,
okay.
In the state of Missouri, we had a certain amount of training, but because of the federal government oversight, Ferguson went above and beyond that. So I think that legislation is always critical, and I think that every state right now is looking at some sort of police reform. The devil will be in the details, but I think one of the things that they'll need to do is, one, listen to the people in terms of what they're demanding, because we police at the pleasure of the people. But two, listen to some of the experts in this and come up with some pretty deliberative policies that are comprehensive and that will work.
Okay. As we move forward with this show, I want you to also, let's talk about what you feel is necessary about police reform, what it's going to take to get there, and how you feel, let's say, the police unions, how are they going to feel about police reform? Because this is a big issue. What's going to happen with the unions? And can you tell me something about, let's start with how you feel that reform needs to take place, and then let's talk about those unions and the pushback that you feel, might happen as a result.
Well, first of all, I'm going to talk about unions. So unions are always going to do what they feel is best for their body. Their sole purpose is to protect the police officers who work for them. They don't necessarily care about policy. They don't necessarily care about anything except protecting the job and the livelihoods of people. And that's their responsibility. But unions can't be an excuse for leaders not to lead. You know, in Ferguson,
okay, absolutely.
In Ferguson, they unionized after I left, or just before I left, they unionized. And one of the things we talked about then was, look, you're doing a pretty good job, Chief. You're pretty fair, but we got to protect ourselves from whoever comes next. That's
sure.
Negotiate salaries, negotiate benefits, negotiate all those things. But when it comes down to hard and fast policies and reform, unions can't stand in the way. We can't let them. That's up to the people and those police leaders and the legislative bodies.
Okay. How do you think that the unions are going to deal with all of what's going on right now? You know, there's a lot happening, and it's going to be interesting to see how those unions react, and how do you feel that they're going to react?
Well, I think unions are going to resist a lot of the changes that are going to be made because they're afraid for their body. And one of the ways they do that is to lobby legislators.
Mhm.
So,
Sure, absolutely.
follow the money. You follow the
Yeah.
money, who's where. But what's going to happen is this is one of those things where it's such a groundswell moment, such a tipping point that reform will have to happen.
Okay.
Now, what unions will do is
Sure.
legislators and argue about what degrees of reform happen. But in that debate is where we're going to get the final product.
Okay. Let's talk about police reform. About a lot of different things about police reform. Where do you feel police reform should start?
Well, one of the things I think we need to do is we need to start putting together pretty much a national set of standards. In the United States, there are 18,000 police departments, and 18,000 communities all have a different degree of how they do things. They're all unique, but there are some things that we've decided that we can agree upon. Oftentimes that's at the state level. And so one state may have standards and training that are much more in depth than another state. I found when I came from Florida, coming into Missouri, it was very easy for me to get certified in Missouri, much more easy than I expected it to be when I came.
Okay.
We have to look at not just the state standards and everything else, but I think as a profession, we need to start looking more holistically at kind of some national, at least, benchmarks. A lot of police departments started to do that with the accreditation process. We started in Ferguson with seeking accreditation because we're looking at best practices. We're looking at
Sure.
that we're doing from a national perspective that says these are the best ways to go. We learn from each other. And so national standards are good. Now, they're not the end all be all because communities still are very unique and will have unique standards. But we need to look at at least some benchmarks that we can agree upon.
Okay. And what do you think that those very first benchmarks should be?
Well, I think one of the things we need to look at is use of force. Obviously, force is the spark on the powder keg that got us here. And so we need to be looking at, some of those things. One of the things we banned in Ferguson is chokehold. There are no chokeholds in Ferguson, but if I talk to 60 different police chiefs, they'll argue about, well, I don't want to take away all of the tools, so I want to move chokeholds to a point of deadly force, so it's reserved for the later thing. I don't see a reason that they should exist, and we got rid of them in Ferguson. I think that's one of the things we need to look at. We also need to look at just policies comprehensively so that we're much more uniform in how we use force, what the standards are, how we pull those officers back.
Yes. Yes. I think that there has to be some type of structure in place. Let's say when they're being trained, can they be trained to use something else other than putting the knee on the neck and, restraining them some other type of way?
Well, look, the knee on the neck that we saw there, let's not get that twisted. That was not policy.
Okay.
That was something way outside of policy. That was an officer who went rogue, and as a result of that, he's being prosecuted for it. So, but there are other things that we need to look at. We need to look at early warning systems. What was in his background that got him to that point? Did they have any warnings? Were there any flags beforehand? There are a number of things that could have happened. Now, policy, training, leadership, all of those things are not going to stop some police officers from stepping off the reservation. But certainly we've got to hold them accountable when they do. Because those who are on the fence and teetering, when they see that you hold one guy's feet to the fire, they'll be sure and not put themselves in that same position.
At this point, as I look at all the things that are happening throughout the United States, I'd say that there are the policemen that are really good and really want to put themselves out in the community. They want to do what's right. And they're about protect and serve. But you have some that are not. So how do you weed those out?
Well, part of that's training, part of that's policy, but a lot of it comes into selection also. Doing a comprehensive look at who you bring on to your police department, doing a comprehensive look at how you hold them accountable through the process, weeding out those that start to give you warnings and red flags very early on. There are a number of things that you do. Now, look, there are 18,000 police departments in the country, and the city of New York alone has 32,000 police officers on its police department. You multiply that by the thousands and thousands of encounters that happen every day. Most police officers do the job the right way, because we're not hearing about all those. What we have to do is make sure that we are standing as guardians on the gate, looking for those anomalies, looking for those guys who took the job because they used to get their lunch money taken. He's Superman with a badge. Looking for those have harbor biases that they can't work professionally past. We have to be careful as police chiefs and as police officers to guard. If we don't police ourselves, we're seeing that the communities are going to start to police us. If police chiefs aren't putting together policies that are comprehensive, that work, then we start to go to legislation and we go to the next step. But eventually we are going to get there.
Chief Moss, I originally came from a rural area. Do you think that there is a difference between, let's say, the state highway patrol versus the city officers versus rural officers? Do you think there's a big gap there? Do you think that their mindset is different? Because what I am feeling and what I am hearing is that there has to be a mindset change. Do you feel that there are definite differences between those three entities and how they operate?
Well, yes, there are. And I'll tell you why. Like I said, there are 18,000 police departments in the country. And every community has a personality. Most of the police officers they hire come from either that community or neighboring communities. And so some of the things that happen in a particular community are really reflective of how that community thinks. Think back to when I went to Ferguson and we started making reform and change. You'll notice that there was a lot of resistance from certain pockets because they had certain expectations. Every city has its own uniqueness, has its own unique attitudes about things and all of those things. So those account for the differences. The other thing that accounts for the difference is what they actually patrol. In a rural area, for instance, two chiefs will have a discussion. A city chief in a densely populated area will talk about something like warning shots and making sure that we don't do warning shots. In a rural area where the chances of you hitting someone is unlikely, they think about warning shots. And so I've been in meetings as a member of the International Association of Chiefs of Police on the board of directors and as a part of Missouri Chiefs. I've been in rooms where we've argued about banning warning shots. Some police chiefs didn't understand that. So, everybody approaches this from a different perspective, and different communities approach things from a different perspective. Then that's why you're going to have those nuances. But I think national standards are critical. State standards are critical to making sure at least we can agree upon most things.
Chief Moss, I'm sitting here looking at all that water and stuff behind you, thinking that, okay, my next interview with you has got to be the water behind me and maybe something else going on, because this is not a good thing, Chief Moss. I'm telling you, you're killing me here. You're killing me. So, okay. But Chief, I want to thank you for coming on the show. You have been a wonderful and informative guest, and I appreciate you sharing your expertise and a general overall knowledge to our global audience. So for this, I want to thank you.
No, thank you. Look, I'm a Florida boy at heart, but having lived in Missouri for a couple of years, part of me is still there too.
I was feeling sorry for you when I seen you, putting on your coat and trudging around in the snow and all of that. I was like, oh man, I said, he's not liking this. I said, so he's probably waiting to get back to Florida.
Well, that's why when I come to visit, it'll be warm.
Okay, then. Chief, thank you so much for being on the show. And I really appreciate you. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. I'm here for you anytime.
Okay, thanks. Have a good evening.
You too.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.